I was born in Odi, a quiet river town in Bayelsa State, nestled between the mangrove swamps and the gentle flow of the river Nun. Odi was not just a place, it was a heartbeat. We lived by the rhythm of the water, by the patience of fishing nets, and by the slow hum of stories told beneath the moonlight. My earliest memories were of laughter, women laughing as they washed clothes by the riverbank, men laughing as they mended canoes, and children laughing as they chased one another through the dusty lanes that wound between thatched houses. Life in Odi was humble, yes, but it was whole. We were not a rich people, but we had peace. Our elders often said that the river gave us everything: food, trade, and wisdom. At dusk, we gathered beneath the great Udala tree, where the oldest men spoke of the oil companies that came and went, of promises made and broken, and of how the Niger Delta's wealth flowed away from us like an endless tide. Still we survived. Until the tide brought something darker. It began, as most tragedies do, with a rumor. Sometime in early November 1999, we heard that a group of armed men, militants, they said, had ambushed and killed 12 policemen near Odi. The news traveled fast, bouncing from canoe to canoe, from marketplace to market square. No one knew exactly who did it. Some claimed it was a band of young Ijaw men angry at the government for exploiting our land while leaving us in poverty. Others whispered that the attackers were outsiders, criminals seeking refuge in our creeks. But the truth did not matter. In the eyes of the world beyond our river, Odi was guilty. I remember that evening vividly. My father sat quietly, peeling cassava by the doorway. My mother's pestle moved slower than usual. The whole compound felt heavy, as if the air itself was listening. My father finally said, without looking up, "This kind of blood brings thunder." He was right. President Obasanjo's voice came over the transistor radio the next morning, sharp and unyielding. The killers must be handed over, or the federal government would declare a state of emergency. It was an ultimatum, one that carried more threat than reason. We all felt it. The government's anger was already marching toward us. The elders of Odi called an emergency meeting. They sent emissaries to Yenagoa and to the state capital, pleading for time, for understanding. They insisted that Odi was innocent, that we did not harbor militants. But the country was angry. The soldiers wanted revenge. And revenge, once awakened, does not listen to reason. The day the soldiers came, the air itself seemed to know. It was a Saturday, quiet and gray. The crickets had stopped singing. Even the river was unusually still. I was 17 then, sitting by the bank with my younger sister, Ter, trying to repair our father's fishing net. That's when I heard it, a distant, metallic growl that did not belong to nature. At first I thought it was thunder rolling in from the sea. But it grew louder, steadier, more deliberate. Then I saw smoke rising from beyond the mangroves. Within minutes the sound turned into chaos. Engines, boots, shouted orders, gunfire. I remember my mother's screams slicing through the air like a blade. "Soldiers," she shouted. "Run." My father didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ter and me and we sprinted toward the bush behind our house. The smell of burning thatch hit us even before the first explosion. I looked back once, just once, and saw the first of the soldiers entering the town, armored trucks behind them. They fired at anything that moved. Bullets tore through mud walls and clay pots alike. The sky turned red, then black. We dove into a shallow ditch, trembling. My father pressed his hand over my mouth. My mother held Ter, her body shaking uncontrollably. From our hiding place I saw our world being unmade. Flames danced from roof to roof. Chickens scattered into the fire. The shouts of men and the cries of women mixed into something inhuman. I saw a man I knew, Uncle Per, running with a white cloth raised high above his head. He was unarmed, pleading. A gunshot cut him down mid-sentence. That was the moment I learned what war looks like. Not the kind in newspapers, but the kind that steals your neighbors in front of your eyes. By nightfall, the soldiers had taken Odi completely. Those who tried to escape by the river were shot. Those who hid in houses were burned out. The air stank of smoke and blood. The noise of gunfire became a kind of rhythm, a dreadful heartbeat that refused to stop. We lay in the ditch for hours, afraid to breathe. I could hear the soldiers shouting in pidgin. "Shoot anything that moves. Clear the whole area." It was not an operation. It was an extermination. When the firing finally eased, the silence that followed was worse. The only sounds were the crackle of burning houses and the occasional scream from someone still alive. I thought of my friends, Fubera, who sat beside me in class and wanted to be a teacher, Tari, who could make a fishing hook out of wire, Madame Ibi, who sold groundnuts by the roadside. I wondered if they had escaped. I wondered if I would ever see them again. The night dragged like an open wound. The stars were hidden behind smoke. The earth beneath us was wet. I prayed it was dew and not blood. At dawn we emerged cautiously. What we saw cannot be described, only felt. Odi was gone. The town that had raised me, the town that taught me to swim and sing, had been turned into a graveyard. Every street was lined with ash. Every house was either flattened or burning. Even the air was hot, heavy with soot and death. We found bodies, too many to count. Men, women, children. Some were burned beyond recognition. Others lay twisted in poses that told their final moments. Mothers shielding babies, elders clutching Bibles. Dogs, goats, chickens, all dead. Only a few structures stood. The first bank building, the Anglican church, and part of the health center. The soldiers had spared them, perhaps as landmarks for the destruction they wanted remembered. The government later claimed that only 43 people died. But even the blind could see that lie. Entire families had vanished. Human Rights Watch would later write of hundreds, but those of us who walked those ashes knew better. Some said 2,000. I stopped counting when the number became meaningless. The soldiers left messages scrawled in charcoal on walls they hadn't burned. This is what happens to the Ijaw. Next time, obey the government. That was when I understood. This was not justice. It was a message written in fire. 4 weeks, we lived in the bush, feeding on roasted plantains and river water. Disease spread quickly among the survivors. Those who were wounded had no hospitals to go to. The soldiers had destroyed everything. When the army finally withdrew, they left behind not peace, but desolation. We returned cautiously, stepping over bodies and bones. Some we buried. Some we burned. The air was thick with the stench of decay and sorrow. Our elders gathered once more under the Udala tree, or what was left of it. They tried to make sense of the senseless. The old men wept openly, something I had never seen before. One of them said quietly, "They killed Odi, but not our spirit." But spirits, I would learn, can also bleed. In the months that followed, the newspapers argued over numbers. The government called it a necessary operation. Human rights groups called it a massacre. Politicians traded blame. But those of us who lived through it knew that both sides had failed us. Yes, the militants made a mistake. Killing policemen was wrong. But the government made a far greater one. You cannot avenge 12 deaths by taking 2,000. I often wonder what might have happened if the federal government had chosen dialogue instead of destruction. The elders were willing to negotiate. The community was ready to cooperate. But pride and power silenced reason. If the soldiers had come not as conquerors but as investigators, house to house, questioning, searching, arresting the guilty, Odi would still stand. But they came with fire, not with justice. We could have prevented it. The militants could have surrendered. The elders could have been listened to. The president could have waited. But every decision was made in anger, and anger never builds, it only burns. Years passed. Odi remained a scar. The Nigerian government denied wrongdoing. No officer was tried, no commander punished. The silence from Abuja was as loud as the gunfire that had destroyed us. But the people of Odi refused to forget. Survivors filed petitions. Activists wrote reports. Journalists visited the ruins and wept. And slowly, truth began to crawl out from under the ashes. In 2013, the Federal High Court ordered the government to pay 37.6 billion naira in compensation for the destruction of Odi. When I heard the news, I was in Yenagoa, older now, trying to rebuild my life. I sat quietly, staring at the radio. Was it justice? Maybe. But justice delayed is not justice healed. Money cannot replace the lives lost, nor can it rebuild trust in a government that saw its citizens as enemies. Still, it was something, a recognition that what happened in Odi was not a military operation. It was a massacre. When I finally returned to Odi years later, the land had changed, but the memory hadn't. New houses had been built, schools reopened, and the government had constructed new roads. Children played again in the same spaces where bullets once fell. Yet the silence beneath their laughter was heavy. The river still carried our ghosts. Every November, the survivors gather by the banks, lighting candles and singing quietly. The song always ends with the same words. Odi no die finish. Odi did not completely die. We rebuild not to forget but to remember. Each new wall we raise is a statement that the spirit of a people cannot be wiped out by guns. That the story of Odi, our story, will outlive those who try to erase it. Sometimes I wonder if the government learned anything from Odi. Because Odi was not just a town, it was a warning. A warning about what happens when power loses its humanity. When the state becomes the predator instead of the protector. If I could speak to those in power today, I would say, send negotiators, not mortars. Send compassion, not tanks. Remember that peace is built through understanding, not fear. And to my people, the youth of the Niger Delta, I would say, do not let anger blind you. Fight for justice, not revenge. Because when the innocent suffer, no side wins. Now, every November, I return to the riverbank where it all began. I light a lantern and watch it drift on the water. Its flame trembles in the wind, but it does not go out, just like the memory of Odi. The river remembers. The land remembers. I remember. And I tell this story, not to reopen wounds but to keep them from being repeated. Because when a government forgets its people, it destroys itself. When a nation forgets its tragedies, it is doomed to relive them. Odi burned because pride shouted louder than reason. And if we forget that lesson, the fire will return, maybe in another town, under another name, but with the same pain. So I tell you, as one who saw the sky turn red and the river turn black. Power without compassion is destruction. Justice without mercy is vengeance. And silence in the face of evil is complicity. Odi was burned to the ground. But its story still breathes, in me, in us, in every whisper of the river. Because memory is the only thing they could not kill.